Okay, hello everybody. Last presentation of the evening. I'm going to get started. Before I jump into things, just a quick note, I'll be posting this to the link you see below here. I will also be recording it in case anyone wants to view it. And the address will be shared again at the end. So if you don't get this address right now, I'll have it up at the end as well, so you can take a look then. While I do my intro talk, I always like to put the thank yous up so people can see the names of some of the people who helped me. Quickly, before I jump into the cars and such, I was surprised to find out that plywood has actually been around for a long, long time. The Egyptians actually were using plywood thousands of years ago. So it's not a new material, although certainly in the 20th century, the technologies developed that it became a far more useful material in the building industry. So here, again, some of the thank yous. These people have helped me with photos, information, guidance. They've written materials that I've referred to as well. So I'm going to spend a good chunk of the time talking about prototypes, not really in any particular order. The first cars I'm going to talk about briefly, St. Louis Refrigerator Car Company. And technically, these are actually insulated cars. St. Louis Refrigerator Car Company was known mostly for hauling product for Anheuser-Busch, and they didn't need to be refrigerated as much as they needed to be.
I think we're all in that boat.
This particular car here was in the 4200 series. I've been able to document photographically 4 different series of cars that had plywood sheathing. It's possible that there were some others in here, but I haven't yet been able to document some of those other series. And here's another photo. This is actually a car when it was brand new, built in 1947. One thing we do know is that not all these cars were resheathed in plywood when they were maintained. A lot of them ended up having tongue and groove siding applied when they were went in for repairs. That's not uncommon. You'll hear that theme as we go through here. It doesn't take a genius, given the experience that we have in hindsight, to see that plywood is not really a great material for being exposed to the elements. So, you know, it stands to reason that a lot of companies didn't use it going forward. I'm going to stop for a second. Whoever isn't muted, could you please mute yourself? The clicking and clacking in the background is distracting. The Fruit Growers Consortium during the war years also used plywood sheathing, all 3 members. Burlington used it on 100 cars they built in the Plattsmouth shops in 1942. Interestingly, and I'm going to go ahead here, Fruit Growers and Western Fruit also built cars. Burlington got a second group of cars later in the war years, and they did not use plywood on those. I don't know if it was because they already realized very quickly that it wasn't the greatest material for sheathing, but they did not go back to it. Fruit Growers and Western Fruit had 3 groups of cars that they used plywood sheathing on. One interesting thing I always thought with these cars, they had these extremely long bracket grab irons here. You can see where my cursor is moving. That was to accommodate attachment relative to the bulkheads. So it was kind of a neat trait of these cars. And here's one of the Western Fruit cars. This photo gives a really good illustration of just how heavily insulated refrigerator cars were. You can see on the doors here how thick that material is. And all of these cars used the consortium's company underframe, company design underframe, which was not the same as AAR underframes in use at the time. Also, you can see here the pulley mechanism on the shaft for the drive there that provided air circulation. That was just coming into use at this time. Not all of the fruit growers in Western fruit cars received it, but some of them did. There's an article that actually published in Railway Mechanical Engineer that profiled some of these cars, and you can read a little bit about them. One thing that I had been puzzling over for years was how the plywood was actually secured along the overlap of the joints. And on this particular group of cars, they used a spline joint, which if you're a woodworker, you probably are familiar with. But basically, there's a groove cut in the face where they join, and then there's a piece that nests in there, and it kind of binds them together. That wasn't the case for all cars. Some of them were just, butted up against each other. I think given where plywood technology in terms of use as sheathing material for railroad cars was at that time, there was a lot of experimentation going on, and trying to figure out what was the best way to do it. All of these articles that I have presented herein are also noted in the references section at the end of this, so you don't have to necessarily worry about copying down that information. This is a drawing that was contained in the article that I just showed. And again, it refers in a couple of places. You can see spline joint referenced here, spline joint referenced here. So that was the first time that I had seen anything that had given me kind of a definitive answer as to how the car's sheathing was butted up against each other. Wilson Car Lines was also one of the early users of this. There were actually 2 articles published in the period journals. One was in Railway Age, one was in Railway Mechanical Engineer. They were almost identical presentations of the material. The interesting thing that I thought was that when I looked at who wrote the articles, it was a gentleman by the name of Harry A. Dodge, who was a sales engineer for the Harbor Plywood Corporation, which made Harborite plywood. So these were probably nothing more than articles that he got inserted into the journals of the time to promote a company product that probably directly contributed to his commissions. So it was a little self-serving, but it does provide a little bit of background about how plywood at that time was manufactured. The photo that was contained in the article of this particular car, which is 9171, is the only one that I have of a Wilson Car Lines car with plywood sheathing. I do have quite a few photos of Wilson Car Lines cars, and I've included this one in here just to show what they look like overall. So this particular car, I believe, is in that same series. This car is 9171. This is 9180, but I'm guessing that Wilson's experience with plywood sheathing, like a lot of companies, was not all that great. And so they probably replaced a lot of that sheathing with tongue and groove. But I like this photo because it does a pretty good job of showing you the design of the cars. And Wilson Car Lines had their own design of cars that they followed for most of the cars that I saw in their fleet up until you get into the 50s and they start building steel cars. But they had 4 sets of crossbearers that looked to be pressed steel shapes with plates that went across and were riveted across the bottom of the center sills. And then I've been trying as hard as I can to look at the photos I have to get a sense of what the body bolsters were. Near as I can tell, they were cast steel, but I haven't seen anything definitive. It's interesting because by the time that a lot of their cars were built in the 40s. Most roads were opting for built up body bolsters, usually of riveted sections of various shapes. But everything I've seen leads me to believe that they had a design that they went with for a lot of the cars in their fleet, and they just stuck to it. PFE was actually, near as I can tell, the first line to actually build any plywood sheathed cars. They had 2 cars that they rebuilt in the late 30s, 1938 and 39. If you're familiar with the PFE fleet of rebuilt cars, starting with the Dash 9 class, running up through the Dash 24, the Dash 9s were actually classified as reconditioned because when they were reworked, they didn't replace the wood superstructure with steel. So they called them reconditioned cars, but these 2 cars actually did receive steel framing. So they were actually rebuilds. One of them had a Viking roof and integral ice hatches, and the other was a car with extra heavy insulation. The Viking roof is pictured in the PFE book, if you have that. And then they also took one R50-1 and rebuilt it into a 2-compartment plywood sheathed car in 1940. That's also covered fairly extensively in the PFE book through photos. They returned to plywood sheathing for the last 209 of the R50-5 rebuilds in between 1945 and 47. These cars were heavily insulated, generally for frozen food service. They were longer than your typical PFE car, and obviously more heavily insulated. The plywood sheathing on these cars, the group that had it, was for the most part replaced with tongue and groove sheathing when they were rebuilt. But as rebuilt, the majority of them did have plywood sheathing, as shown here. One interesting thing about this particular car, normally the ventilated refrigerator stenciling was centered top to bottom between the medallions. It wasn't on this car, and I don't know if that was standard for all of the R50-5s. The other thing, this is an example of the reversal of the red and white in the UP medallion. On most cars, the red was out here at the outermost portions of this medallion. On this car, it was reversed. Interestingly, it's not as unusual as something that you would consider unique. So if you have a PFE fleet of in your models of 40 cars or so, having a couple of these is not completely out of the realm of possibility if you model the late 40s and early 50s. The cars that in the PFE fleet that are most commonly associated with plywood sheathing were the Dash 24 classes of rebuilds, and these were 26 plus 100 cars. That made them among the rebuilds. The Dash 9s were a huge group of cars. The Dash 16s, you were talking about almost 4,000 cars there. And then 2,600 was the next largest group in those of the rebuilds. These were all plywood sheathed. These were rebuilt in late 47 and into 48. This is a car that, again, in a fleet of 30, 40 cars, you should probably have one of these, if not a couple. They were offered as kits by Sunshine. My understanding, I don't have one, is that the Mike's Train House car is actually a better representation of this class than the R4023 that it's decorated for. Most of these had rectangular panel roofs, but some of them had diagonal panel roofs. And this gives you a view of the end on here. It was a 3-4 improved dreadnought end. You could credibly model one of these cars with an Intermountain R40-23 using the ends in the roof with a Tichy PFE underframe, and then just scratch building the sides. And then there were some -9 cars that we know of that were plywood sheathed as well in the late 40s. At that time, these -9s were coming up on 10 years since they had been refurbished in the late 30s. So some of them were going through the shops getting resheathed. And this is certainly, something that's plausible. There's no indication in the PFE car cards how many cars actually had plywood sheathing. So it's strictly based upon photo evidence. Basically, it seems like any car that was resheathed from, the late 47 period into, kind of late 49 would have gotten plywood. So there was certainly a not insignificant number that would have had this. There's also documentation of a -21 and probably some of the -16s as well that would have had this as well at the same time. I have a couple references in here to the PFE book also for those who are curious about digging in a little more. And this car that you see here, I'll cover it in a little bit, is the subject of the kit bash parts that are part of this clinic. Canadian Pacific, now moving into the kind of box cars, they received emergency cars that were plywood sheathed. There were cars built in 42, which is what you see here in this associated article. There were also cars built in 43. This is a nice photo. Canadian Pacific, interestingly, also received cars that were single sheathed. Emergency cars with regular, boards for the sheathing. These particular cars had, really pronounced bolt heads here that you can see. Makes for a very distinctive looking car. That was, one of the ways to secure the plywood sheathing against the structural members. Great Northern was a big adherent to plywood sheathing for quite a while. They had a famous group of cars that had Omaha orange sides and Glacier orange sides with some green trim, attractive medallions, etc. The first cars were classic emergency cars in that, they were approved by the War Production Board. They had a large number of them had composite doors. And then they continued to build cars to that same design throughout 45 and 47, interestingly enough. They also built 100 automobile cars in 47. And then in the 50s, they resheathed 1,000 of their ARA design box cars with plywood as well. So there's, some question about whether this was to placate lumber interests that they served. I've always been a little skeptical of that argument, but it's certainly plausible. Here's an advertisement that was, running in period publications at the time. This is one of the emergency cars with a 4-5 dreadnought end. Shows some of the construction techniques, particularly the photo at the lower left. You can see he's applying carriage bolts to secure the plywood sheathing against the side sill there. This is a photo of one of those cars. It's only, about 4 years or so old at that time. You can see the 4-5 dreadnought ends, had a 10-foot inside height. You really can see the way that the nail heads stuck out once these cars got weathered. This was something Martin Lofton from Sunshine sent me a set of sides when he was releasing this car, and I put them in my milling machine and put a needle into the chuck and went along and impressed these little dimples on the whole car side, and that's what he released as the weathered version of this car. They also had these highly unusual combination drop bracket grabs that you see at the left of the car end here. And this part of the door, the upper part there, the composite part, was plywood as well. They also had 24 cars that were plywood sheathed, that were express merchandise cars. If you look in the equipment registers, this class actually has 25 cars. Car number 2500 was actually aluminum sheathed. So it's listed together with these other 24 cars, but it actually had aluminum sheathing. And you notice these had roller bearing trucks, which was just coming into kind of vogue at that point in time, and was generally only used for cars that were going to stay on company rails. Here's another shot of, this is a builder's photo of one of the wartime emergency cars with the composite door. Here's one of the cars that they built after the war. These had 3/4 improved dreadnought ends. You notice that the two panels were welded together there. This one had superior doors. There was kind of a mixing of components after the war. You had a lot of different components used on build groups because there were still shortages. So you might see different door types, different handbrakes, different running boards, etc. That was common basically until really the late 40s. So here's just a little sheet of some of the kits that have been available over the years for some of these cars. Sunshine did the Burlington fruit growers, and actually I omitted the Western fruit. Sorry, I'll add that in before I post it. They did the emergency reefers of these cars, including the plywood cars. Yarmouth Model Works did the Canadian Pacific emergency box car. It's been out of production. You know, I'm sure that's the kind of thing that might show up on eBay from time to time. And, you know, I don't know what Pierre's doing, but potentially if there's enough interest, that's something that we could see again as a re-release. The GN cars have been covered pretty well by both Sunshine and Intermountain. The PFE-24 cars, those show up on eBay fairly regularly at reasonable prices for Sunshine kits. I picked up one within the last year for less than $50, which is less than the cost of a retail price for a resin kit today. So, you know, that's something that's easily digestible. And then the Dash 9 cars that I'm going to talk about now, you know, if you weren't able to get one of the sets that we'll be sending out, National Scale Car will be releasing those as well. So what I did was I produced the sides basically as a drop-in fit for the Red Caboose HO scale kit. So everything I'll be talking about here is related to marrying it up with that car. If you have a Sunshine Models Dash 9 car, you could conceivably work it to fit these sides as well. That's not out of the realm of possibility. And everything I've done here could be done for O scale, because I know there's a Red Caboose model in O scale. The key things, you know, in making the pattern, there are 6 sheathing panels on each side of the door. You have to accommodate a kick plate. There's a plate at the top also that has a drip guard there. And these cars did not have, all the photos I've seen of these cars don't have wood hatch platforms. So you just basically have the wood hatches, hatch covers kind of naked there. I'll talk a little bit about that. So, you know, building the model is kind of the easy part, but I also like to tell people what I did. It's all white, but basically what you see at the top here is these are actually 6 pieces of 10,000 styrene of equal width, and they're not glued down yet. I just laid them down here so that I could make sure that the spacing and the sizing was right. The first thing I did in the center was I glued a piece at the bottom for the kick plate. That was 60 thousandths tall. And then at the top, I put a piece of 100 thousandths tall strip styrene. And then that gave me the dimension that for the height of the doors here. And then the doors, if you look at the doors on prototype cars, they're not actually the same width. One is always wider than the other. So I didn't have an exact dimension. I just made this one 27 inches wide, this one 21 inches wide for 4 feet across. And I glued that down to a 20 thousandths backing, which was in turn glued down to 1/8 inch thick styrene sheet. Once I had those 4 pieces in place, then I added these sheathing panels on each side of the door. Were I doing this again, it would be a lot easier to just glue down a piece of styrene that covers this whole area and then very lightly scribe a line using a scalpel blade or an X-Acto blade, and then come back and kind of flatten it back down. And that would kind of give you the same effect. I wanted to try this again. Whenever I do something new, I like to learn something and expand my modeling horizon. So this worked out fine, but it'd probably be easier to just scribe those lines and then take the kerf and flatten that kerf back down. So you would still have the remnants of a line there, and it would be effectively flat. The Sunshine Models Dash 24 has a really heavy scribe line in it, and it to my eye doesn't replicate the prototype as well as it might. Once I had all that done, I added all the hardware for the doors and everything. And so this close-up here shows you these hinges are from Grantline, and the Grantline parts are still available from San Juan. I don't know their full name, but San Juan now markets the Grantline parts. They purchased them. So they're available through them. They also sell the door hardware, which you see here. It's not the same height that you need for this model. So this piece here at the top, this little piece here, and then this are from the Grantline parts. And then I kind of filled in the gaps here and here with 10,000 square styrene strip, which is available from Plastruct. Evergreen doesn't make styrene strip that small, but Plastruct does. So that got me all of the hardware, the hinges, etc. This little piece here and this hardware at the bottom were actually carved off the red caboose sides that came from the kit that's used to build the model that I'm making. So they were just donor parts. Same thing for these little hooks here. Those were carved off the red caboose body. And then the styrene kind of that's to simulate the metal that they rested against was made with 5,000 styrene. Same for these pieces here. Those are 5,000 styrene. N scale Archer rivets were used. I covered over the top of the door with a piece of 6-inch scale 5,000ths styrene, and then I added a 1x3 on edge for the drip guard. Kick plate is also a piece of styrene. And then these angles down here that you see, my feeling is that those are not well rendered on the red caboose model. They're lacking any bolt rivet detail, and I just think they don't look particularly good. So I made them from strip styrene on edge, and I believe it's 10 by 30. It might be 1 by 3. I'll have that in the notes. And then this little bit here is a 2-inch wide strip of 5,000 styrene that's butted up against that. This is most of the detail work to make the pattern right here. And then I'm going to go through a little bit. I haven't finished the model, so you're getting here what I've done. But basically taking that red caboose body, if you go on the ends and you saw down kind of these slots with a little razor saw that runs here, my goal was to keep the sub ends in place and get rid of these the sides. So I made these cuts here, and then on the inside of the car body, just with an X-Acto knife, I made several passes and then snapped the sides out. And you can see at the top here, this side has already been removed. This one's ready to be bent and snapped out. And just a quick note here, because this is important. Your donor red caboose car body should be one of the later red caboose releases. When they tooled the cars, the first ones they released were the R30-12 cars, which are unrefurbished cars. Their height is too short for the rebuilds. When they did the refurbished cars, when they first tooled them, they didn't make them tall enough, so they went back and retooled it again to make taller cars. If you go to Dick Harley's site here, it'll explain the difference, it shows it graphically, and it'll tell you the right kits to get. So just be aware of that. You want to make sure that your car body is tall enough. The other thing I did, on the prototype cars, the stringers at the outside of the car edges, which would have been here, were also kind of wrapped up in the side sills. I scribed and snapped and removed those off at both edges. And I replaced the side sills and stringers on those. I'll show you a photo of that in a second. So what I ended up with after I removed the sides was I had the sub ends and subfloor, as you see here. I added the ends in both places, and you can see there actually are like little indexing holes on this end. The A end, the two location pins run vertically. On this end, if you could see the inside there, they actually run horizontally. And then you can see I've glued the floor in this place. Again, it's indexed for the A and B because there's this extra hole here to help you with that. When I glued the sides into the car body, the kit has them actually mitered. So I ended up, and I didn't know how this was going to go until I actually built the model. So my apologies for making you, you're going to have to do this yourself, but when you get the castings, you'll have to do this. But I filed and mitered the corners, and you can see one of them here as it's fully mitered, so that they would fit in against the car ends. So you have like an angle here. And the way I did that was, this is the flat end before I filed it. I just marked it up with the black marker. So as I filed it, you could see where you removed material. You can see there's a little bit of a remnant of the black magic marker still on the very edge of that. But you file it kind of diagonally here, removing more material along here than you do at the bottom, and then you end up with the mitered corner. I tacked it together using ACC, and then I used these 125 square styrene pieces to pull everything together. And the way I did that is I glued the styrene here, because this is styrene here, so it was a styrene to styrene joint, and then I used ACC here to kind of tie it all together. And then once I had the two ends solidly in place, I went and I used a piece of 60 by 156 styrene. And again, I tacked that in place here and here. And then I glued the styrene to the subfloor. And then once that had dried and was in place, I knew that this was going to be straight. I went and glued the back face of the resin piece along this entire joint here. And that gave me a fully straight joint. And I knew that the resin piece would be straight end to end as well. And then once that was done, I repeated it on the other side. And then the roof would drop in, and it was all very easy. I made reference to the fact that I had to add new stringers, which I did here. These are 40 by 60 thousandths pieces of styrene. They fit up against the bottom of the side and against the edge of the floor. This shows you with all of the cross members in place, the body bolsters, and the basic brake pieces in place. One of the things, because this has a Bettendorf underframe and it's only a single fish belly section, I actually drilled through and I just threaded this piece of 20,000 styrene all at once. You could make it two pieces, but because it's a single center sill section, it might come out a little wonky. I mean, I know this doesn't look perfectly straight, but it's only going to be viewed from the side once the model's on the rails, so it's not that big a deal. This gives you a view of the AB valve with all of the brake pipes in there. And then all of the mounting brackets here, this is sheet brass. These are bent from sheet brass as well as here. And this is for the dead lever. This is also bent from sheet brass. I'll cover that in a little bit more detail when I show all of the finished model portions on the blog, but this just gives you a little idea of how those look. These are a couple different angles as well. You can see there's a little T section here for the branch between the dirt collector and the train pipe. The other big thing, the Red Caboose car either has full wood hatch platforms or integrated hatch covers. It doesn't have the wood hatch covers without the platform. So what I did was I cut along each of these edges here using a number 11 X-Acto blade and then kind of snapped it away. Before that though, you need to remove these pieces here, and you have to very carefully remove them with a number 17 X-Acto chisel blade or something similar. And then once you have those off, you can remove the hatch platforms and you end up with these pieces here. You glue them in place. It's nice because they actually have a very fine lip that snaps into the opening of the openings for the hatches. So it's a nice drop in. I actually added a little filler on these to clean them up. That's what that gray is there. And then, and then I glued the hatch covers in place. I glued them like this first. And then these are the pieces that you see here that you actually very carefully carved off the hatch platforms, the wooden hatch platforms. It all worked out quite nicely. It looks exactly like it does on the prototype. And this is all to be continued. This is the model as it sat earlier this week. I've made a few more updates, but if any of you are familiar with the how I did the Litchfield and Madison Gone handout a few years at St. Louis, I did a couple more postings on my blog as I continued to do the detailing and updates and such. And that was where the model was kind of finished. For those of you who signed up for the parts, we're lucky enough to, we'll be sending those out over the course of the next week or so. And there'll be a tracking number so you can look for that. And then once we get everything else together, Ryan will be posting these on his site. It's kind of a cool project, fun one, and it'll give you something that should be highly unusual. I can't imagine there are a lot of people who have Plywood Sheathed -9 models. here are the references that I mentioned. And again, I'll be posting this. So the railway age and mechanical engineering references you can probably find in engineering libraries, or I think California State Railroad Museum and Kalmbach Memorial Library might have those things and can photocopy them. And then there's a couple books referenced as well. Again, this will be posted to the blog that you see here. The recording, I'll give the link, it'll be on YouTube. I'm gonna leave this up as you see it here while I answer questions. I think I'll be able to do that. Let me go to the chat if I can. Pull that up. 1 sec. I can't see the chat. Can I don't know if Ryan or Jerry, you could.
Ted, I'm here. Yeah, I'll go through the chat here for you.
Okay.
Okay. What decals will be needed for these cars?
So there will be the decals in here included in this will cover two different schemes. One is what you see here with the this post 1950 scheme with the UP medallion with Union Pacific Railroad. And it's a little bit of a spoiler, but the other scheme that will be in here is a black and white medallion that UP introduced in '48. And Dick Harley and Tony Thompson and I have been going back and forth a little bit on that. And we're working on an article, but the research I've been finding leads me to believe that circa early 1948, the red, white, and blue medallion was out at the same time that UP, when they dropped ventilated refrigerator and just went to just strictly refrigerator here, that medallion that we have all thought was red, white, and blue up until 1950 was actually black and white. And I've got quite a few color photos now of that. So we're going to be publishing something on that, but it will include that black and white medallion in the lettering.
Okay, next question. This car has two types of trucks, both with lateral motion devices. Was this necessary?
So what happened was when they shopped these cars, they would jack them up, do the work they needed, and trucks were just rolled back under them. You know, it's the same way. Sometimes on an X29, you'll see two types of 2DF8 trucks with different bolsters. Similarly here, some of the cars were built with different types of trucks, and so you could see different types of trucks on the cars. Unfortunately, the truck at right, which is an ARA Type Y with Barbary lateral motion devices, is not available in HO scale.
Did the Wilson car retain the plywood on the ends?
You know, in all of the Wilson car photos I have, I just don't have enough information to make a definitive statement. I know, like on this PFE-9 that you see here, even when the sides were sheathed in plywood, the ends still had tongue and groove. So I just don't have I'd love to. I'm going to start trying to find more Wilson car photos to see if I can come up with a good answer.
And I know when you showed that photo, I thought the same thing too. Is the end still plywood? It looks sort of like it may be. So, how soon after these cars, or how soon were these cars resheathed post World War II?
The Dash 9s, most of them on about when they came up on 10 years. So like this particular car, even though it was repainted in '53, it was actually reconditioned in November of '49. And that's when it got the plywood sheathing. unfortunately, because the car cards didn't tell you what type of sheathing it got, you know, my guess is anything that was sheathed circa late 47 to about 1950 would have had plywood. So if you have car cards for Dash 9 cars and you know that they were shopped in that late 47 to about, you know, 1950 timeframe, they probably got plywood sheathing. So, you know, it's all of the car cards, or at least the vast majority of them, do exist at the California State Railroad Museum Library. So it's a question of matching up cars that were shopped in that time period, and then you could make a good assumption that they would have gotten plywood.
Okay. What is the source of the great looking AB control valve?
That is that's the Detail Associates Grant Line brake set. And I have not reached out to San Juan yet to see if they have that tooling. They should, if it came from Grant Line, and that still is the best AB brake set out there. And really, it was marketed with two sets of parts. You had the main components, the cylinder, the reservoirs, the valve, and then there was a separate, I'm guessing it was Delrin part that had some other things on it. They should be able to run those, the styrene sprues, if they have the tooling. So I haven't contacted them yet because I have a bag with a lot of them that I bought in bulk from Detail Associates. But, you know, I'm sure if people pressure them, they'll run them if they have them.
Okay, Dan Smith reposted his question about the trucks, clarifying what he was after. That was the lateral motion device required in both trucks?
Oh, I don't think so. I can't say definitively. I don't know if it's true though.
Okay. Did the plywood sheathed cars keep their plywood sheathing for the normal 10 years, or did they lose the plywood early?
You know, some of them, like some of the Dash 24s, continued. I think that their entire service lives. I have photos of some of them, you know, in the late 60s. So I think it's just a question of when they were shopped. I mean, you know, I know if anyone who's ever used plywood for anything outdoors, you know, I live in New York, so I constantly see the construction sites that have plywood around them. It doesn't hold up at all. And, you know, it's easy for us to say in hindsight that plywood was a horrible idea for sheathing, but at the time, you know, it might have been something they were trying to do. But yeah, my sense is that as soon as cars were resheathed, they got rid of the plywood. But if it was on there, it stayed on.
Has anyone done the UP shields with reversed colored stripe in
HO? There was a small run of them that was done custom. However, I can say in my crystal ball that Aaron, you will be doing them because I did the artwork for you before you took over the decal line. So they'll be coming out. I'm sorry, Ryan.
Right, I'm not Aaron. Okay, well, great. Excellent news. I think that's the last question. There's a bunch of comments about other plywood uses on cars or cabooses and stuff like that. I think that's it. Ted, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation.
Did anyone answer the question about when the SLRX cars were built?
They were built 41 through 47. Okay. Thank you to everyone. Since this is the last one, I guess it will be wrapping it up. We, you know, as usual, we really appreciate the participation, and this was our largest attendance by a pretty good margin that we've had. We'll be doing it again February 20th. I've got another set of sides that I already have been kind of kicking around in my head, and there's something that would be another fairly easy kit bash that I think would be good for people. They won't be out for a little while. We've got to kind of digest this, but we really liked the enthusiasm around that. And again, thanks to everyone. We had an incredible lineup again, and we'll keep doing that. And I don't know if Jerry, Ryan, you guys have any additional comments?
Yeah, there was one question, a general question about the tip jar that has come up in the chat and has come up on the Hindsight